freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. Over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my own grave and go home to my Lord and be free. No more weeping, don't you know? No more weeping. No more weeping over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my own grave and go home to my Lord and be free. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Freedom over me.
Linda from Canada.
And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free.
Mary from Detroit.
And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave. I'm going home to my
Derek
Lord
from Boston.
and be free.
All right. Welcome, everybody. I know you're in your living rooms singing with us and you're feeling the spirit. My name is Niall Fort, and I'm going to be your host, your worship leader, your MC, whatever tradition you come out of. We're going to have a great time. I'm very, very excited to be here, not just with these esteemed, distinguished, phenomenal, talented, creative panelists, but with you all. This is going to be a space of learning and growing and praying and singing. So we're really looking forward to it. We already see some folks that are dropping your names and the cities that you're located into the chat box. So please continue to do that. We want to know who's on the call with us. We want to make this as personal as possible. We know that we're social distancing, but we know that we're still together in spirit. So we just shouting out folks. I see Max B from Arizona. I see Kevin from Princeton, New Jersey. Shout out to Princeton. Cornelius from San Francisco. So please keep your names coming in the chat box. Also, you will see some links that will be posted to the chat box. Please click those links. There'll be information of upcoming actions that will be happening, resources for you to learn more about what we discuss here today. So we want this to be as interactive as possible. And we want this to be a space where we can learn, but where we can also put our learning into action. So as you put your names into the box, also make sure that you're looking out for those links that will be shared there today. Also, just a quick plug-in. This is also being live streamed on Friends of Sabeel North America's Facebook page. So right now, go ahead and text your cousin, text your auntie, text your clergy, your pastor, your neighbor, knock on somebody's door, but don't stay too close, and tell them that this is happening. This is happening. And so we actually invite you to invite others so that we can share in this together. And just a quick plug, we're gonna remind you of this at the end, but just in case you have to hop off, we are gonna have a follow-up call that I'll be hosting on June 16th. You will get some more information about that if you register. We'll be following up via email, but just wanted to throw that out there. So maybe try to put that on your calendar now, and don't schedule one of your 100 or so Zoom calls that I know you have coming up. Just go ahead and put that box and leave it empty so that we can join a follow-up call. So at this time, I want to give very brief bios to our speakers. As I said, we have some phenomenal speakers. Also, real quick, I come out the Black church. So we believe in this thing called call and response. So I can't see y'all, but I just know that you are in your living room snapping and clapping and stomping your feet. And I'm going to sense if you're not, and I'm going to call you out. All right, I'm from the Black church, so I need this call and response. Okay, you can call and respond right in the chat box too. Let us know if we're doing all right. Say take your time when you want us to take our time. Folks from the church know what I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm gonna read the bios of these phenomenal panelists. I'm gonna keep it short, even though they can be very long, so we can go ahead and get right into it. And I'm going to read their bios in the same order that they are going to give us their words today. So first up, we have Erica N. Williams. Erica is an ordained minister, an activist, and an organizer for the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. After Erica speaks, we will have Corey Peterson Smith, who is the Michael Ratner Middle East Fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies. And after Corey, we will have Ashley Woodard Henderson, who is a Black Appalachian working class woman. She is the co-executive director of the historic Highlander Research and Education Center in New Market, Tennessee. And last but definitely not least, we have Sarah Nahar. She is a border walking scholar activist working on a PhD. Shout out, she's working on a PhD, y'all. Shout her out. She's working on a PhD in religion and environmental studies in Syracuse, New York. So with that said, we want Sister Erica to start us off. And Erica is really going to ground the conversation in really what kind of the spirit of Dr. King, but also this relationship between Black folks and Palestine. So Erica, please.
Good evening, everyone. On the International Fellowship of Christian and Jews website, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. is portrayed as a staunch supporter of the Jewish state and Jewish people. It is said that he saw Christians and Jews as people of faith who are duty-bound to join together. The latter part of that statement is true, but when it comes to the matter of King being a staunch supporter of the Jewish state and Jewish people, the jury has not yet rendered a verdict. According to Michael R. Fishbar in the book Black Power and Palestine, Transnational Countries of Color, on the evening of July 24th, 1976, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had a lengthy call with some of his close associates and was quoted as saying gloomily, "There were some dark days before, but this is the darkest." Many would have thought that King was referencing how things had turned out for the worse, with most of his allies turning their backs on him due to him speaking out against the Vietnam War. But that was not it. The matter most pressing on King's heart and mind was the Arab-Israeli conflict. A month prior, the war had broke out in the Middle East, and King was contemplating on if he should take the pilgrimage he had been planning for a year or so to the Christian holy sites in Jerusalem and the West Bank. But King knew he had a lot at stake during this time. King felt that no matter what he said, and if he went on the pilgrimage, that he would be damned if he did and damned if he didn't, because the Arab world would interpret his going as an endorsement of what Israel had done. But King had a lot of questions about what was happening, and he doubted what had been done. King was really torn because at the time he was trying to continue the fight for civil rights, and his response to the challenges in the Black Power movement, and his need to speak out against the war and upholding the principles of nonviolence, and wanting to keep good ties with his Jewish supporters, which included Rabbi Herschel, Abraham Herschel, who was a staunch supporter of the civil rights movement. The Arab-Israeli conflict was adding to this mounting tension that King had, and he knew eventually he would have to say something. In March of 1959, Dr. King and Coretta took a short trip to Palestine, East Jerusalem, and the West Bank. This was the only trip that King had ever took to the area. This trip allowed for Dr. King to come face to face with the Palestinian people and to hear their stories and to see what was really going on. And I got to pause right here, because in the Black church, we know what that means when we say what's really going on. King was able to see for himself and not listen to the stories of what he had been told, but he was able to interact with the people who were living through these evils every day. During this time, King also had an opportunity to meet with Palestinian dignitaries and officials and historians, and they believed that King really took to heart what he saw. And when King returned to the United States, he would not let his time in the West Bank go, and he preached a sermon called A Walk Through the Holy Land, which talked about the Third World and the struggle of its people and how it was relevant to the Black Americans that were sitting right in the pews. King even received a letter from an American who lived in Palestine, and they informed King about the Palestinian citizens who were having to carry travel passes like Blacks had to do in South Africa. And this really bothered King. King received numerous invitations from the Israeli government to go back and to visit the Holy Land, but he did not accept the invitations. When it came to the Arab-Israeli conflict, King wanted to help keep the peace, and eventually he knew he had to take a stance on this, and he ended up taking a stance with two parts. He believed that the Israel should have a state and they should have security, but this is what they don't often tell you. But he also knew in order for this to happen that the Arab folks needed to have economic security. He knew that the folks who were being oppressed every day by the Israeli oppression needed to have the security that they deserved. And until his death, King continued to hold on to this and the call for peace, and he never took sides in the matter. But I just truly believe in my sanctified mind, as we say in the church, that King knew that the Arab people needed their freedom and that they needed it right now. And I would argue to say that if it was not King, I would argue to say that King was one of the most influential Black preachers of all time. Hey, I'm just gonna go on and say it, he probably is. But I know it's been a bunch of women that have been influential preachers too. But we'll give King that tonight and let it be known that he was one of the most influential. Black folks love Dr. King. In the Black community, honey, we celebrate Harriet Tubman, Malcolm X, and Dr. Martin Luther King. We revere him and we see him as one of the ones who really followed Christ. I often tell people that King was not killed because he had a dream, but King was killed because he had a plan. And that plan was the Poor People's Campaign, because King knew that poverty was an issue that needed to be eradicated. One of my favorite quotes by King was, "I choose to identify with the underprivileged. I choose to identify with the poor. I choose to give my life for the hungry. I choose to give my life for those who have been left out of the sunlight of opportunity. I choose to live for those who find themselves seeing life as a long and desolate corridor with no exit signs. This is the way that I'm going. If it means suffering a little bit, I'm going that way. If it means sacrificing, I'm going that way. If it means dying for them, I'm going that way, because I heard a voice saying, do something for others." And in 2018, just like Dr. Martin Luther King, I had the opportunity to travel to Palestine. And I'm wearing this scarf today, not just to be like cliche and wearing a scarf, but I'm wearing it because the people there told me to take it back and to remember the plight that they had and make sure that I never be silent about it. And I tell you, what I saw was just like the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for more revival that we're fighting for right here in the U to the S to the A. I saw the systemic racism, the poverty, the ecological devastation, the war economy, the militarism, and that Christian distorted narrative that's there in the Holy Land. And I want to tell you all today that it wasn't a pretty sight, and doggone it, I'm angry about it. And that's why I'm here tonight. And that's why I stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people, because I know that it's not right. And I follow, just like King did, that brown-skinned Palestinian Jew who, when he stepped on the scene, he said, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor, to heal the brokenhearted, to set the captive free, and proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord now." And I know they want to tell tell us that he was crucified because he was a son of God. No, he was crucified because he went against the Roman Empire, because he spoke out against the injustice of his people. And so today, that's why I'm here. And I want to make this bold claim. And I want to say this to Kufi and any other groups that they want to hold King as one of their people. I want you to say, take King and a lot of these Black clergy off your list, because they're not on the roster of those who seek to oppress and to marginalize people. I believe with all of my heart that if Dr. King had lived a little bit longer, there would have been an international poor people's campaign, and Palestine would have been one of its main organizing places. And so I leave you today, and I call on each of you, all of my clergy folks, to go back to the gospel and see what it really said. And I truly believe if King had lived longer, he would have been on this call tonight and would have said that we are to make sure we fight for the rights of the Palestinian people, because that's what Christ did, and that is what we are called to do. Ashe and amen.
Amen. Wow, wow, wow. Can we clap it up, snap our fingers, stump our feet for Sister Erica? I mean, she really brought the fire. I would say that King is on the call, and King just spoke through you. And I just really am fired up right now. You offered us so much, Erica. You offered us so much. And I just want to point out something that you did that's so important. You talked about King having not just a dream, but a plan. And you really connected King with that Palestinian Jew named Jesus. King and Jesus, neither one of them died of old age. They both died fighting the empire because they were willing to put people over profit, because they were willing to speak truth to power. And that's the Jesus we're talking about. And we also have to ask, which Jesus are we worshiping? The same thing with King, right? Which King are we lifting up? So I really just think what you gave us was so rich, so we can think about which tradition are we talking about. So thank you so much. Let's show a lot of love to Erica, y'all. Get in the chat box. She just offered us so much. And we're getting this thing started off right. So please hang with us. We now want to transition from the spirit of King to how did we get to where we are? I mean, this didn't just drop from the sky, you know. There's a historical condition that got us here. So we want to bring Corey in, who's going to really talk about the history of Black Palestinian solidarity. So much we hear about this same time period that Erica spoke of, the relationship between Jewish activists and African American civil rights leaders. And while that is an important history, oftentimes we don't hear about this other history that was happening at the same time of Black and Palestinian solidarity. So Brother Corey, if you can come on and offer your food on the table, it's so rich already. We welcome you.
Thank you. This is a table, this is a feast that we're gathered around, and I'm so grateful to be here. I'm so grateful to my sister Erica for opening us up and setting us off right, and I'm so grateful for what's about to come. So what I would love to talk about tonight is really three things. When we think about the Black Palestine solidarity, I would argue that there's a long history of Black identification with and solidarity with Palestine. And I want to talk about it in three parts. The first is Palestine as a story. The second is Palestine as a place. And the third is Palestinians as a people, Palestine and Palestinians as a people. And those are all, of course, related, but they are all distinct. And if there's one thing that I want to get across tonight, it's that each of those things that Black folks have connected to, each of those histories, each of those living histories, because they're all alive today, are actually distinct from the modern nation state of Israel. Because the word Israel is a word that many Black people learn in the church. That's where I first heard the word Israel, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. But Israel biblically, the story of the Israelites is something that's separate from the modern nation state of Israel. And so I want to get into that. I want to start by talking about the history of identification and solidarity among Black Americans with Palestine in terms of a story, And for that, if you'll allow me, I want to speak personally, because that story is a story that I came into in the Black church. I came up in the AME church, the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and the name of my church was Israel AME. Why? Why was it so important? Why was the story of the Israelites so important that my church was named after it? It's because that story that I learned, and that I'm sure many people on the call learned, is a story of a group of people, the Israelites, who were enslaved, in bondage, and then freed and made it to the promised land. And that story has an obvious resonance with the Black experience in this place, the idea that we could someday be free and make it to a promised land. And we know that the promised land is kind of a concept, but in the story of the Israelites, it was also a place that today is called Palestine, right? And so that's the first thing, is for a long time, long before Black Americans set foot in the place of Palestine, there was a calling to a connection through the story of Palestine, this location as a site of liberation, as we learned it in a biblical tradition, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing, though, is that there was a point at which Black Americans did start going to Palestine. And that actually happened. I mean, it was beautiful to hear the story, the detailed story. I haven't heard the details that Sister Erica went into of Dr. King's pilgrimage to Palestine. But in fact, he was not the first Black preacher to make a pilgrimage to Palestine. And as early as the 1800s, as the 19th century, there were actually Black clergy who were going, along with other clergy, other Christian clergy from the United States, were going to Palestine. Now, you know, what those pilgrimages looked like, I think we could have a whole conversation about. This is a time when Americans and Europeans are going to lots of places around the world in a way that I think is quite colonial, right? But there were times when Black American clergy would join these other clergy in these pilgrimages to Palestine. And again, we could talk about how cool or how colonial was that, but there was something that they saw and that they brought back to Black churches here in the United States, which is this place that we have heard of in this story is also a real place. It's an actual place. It's not just a metaphor, it is an actual place, this place that is called Palestine. So that therein lies a connection between Black Americans through the Christian church and Palestine, the place. And with that, I want to get into how we developed a history of solidarity and identification with Palestinian people, right? That comes, of course, after it comes in the context of what Sister Erica talked about, the oppression of Palestinian people, first and foremost, right? And people who were not only oppressed when the state of Israel was created, which was a process that culminated in what Israelis call their declaration and their war of independence in 1948, what Palestinians call the Nakba, the Great Catastrophe. That was really a war on this group of people who had been living in this place for many, many generations, and where a bunch of other people, Zionists, decided to establish a new state, a nation state called Israel, establish it in 1948, right? And again, I think it's important to point out that there's a history to the modern nation state of Israel, because there is one story that is told that says that the story of the ancient Israelites and the modern nation state of Israel are the same thing, that there is an unbroken line between that biblical experience and the modern nation state. But in fact, that state was established in 1948, okay? Even a century old. When it was established through a massive war, incredible violence against Palestinian people who were inhabiting that place, most of whom were expelled from their home and many of whom remain in that location. Well, Palestinians did not take this quietly. There was Palestinian resistance from the beginning. And particularly in the 1950s and 1960s especially, as the movement, as the Black freedom struggle in this country is heating up, that becomes a context for Black Americans in motion fighting for our freedom to connect with other people in motion around the world fighting for their freedom. And Palestinians played a very important role in what was a global era of decolonization and struggle for liberation. I want to also refer to Dr. King. Sister Erica did it so well, went through that history so well, but to say that as he was organizing in the South and in this country, very much on his mind was what was happening elsewhere in the world. In 1963, when he is jailed in Birmingham, in his letter from Birmingham jail, he talks about how slow things are moving in this country, how long it is taking for us to achieve our freedom. And he says, our sisters and brothers in Asia, in Latin America, and Africa are moving with jet-like speed toward freedom, while we are moving at a horse and buggy pace to get a cup of coffee at a lunch counter in this country. So he is thinking not only of what's happening in Alabama, he is looking at what's happening all around the world as people who have been colonized are fighting for their freedom and saying, we're with them. We are all the same, right? So in that global struggle, Palestinians played a central role. And that is why organizations like the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, declared solidarity with Palestinians. It is why Malcolm X declared solidarity with Palestinians. It is why the Black Panthers declared solidarity with Palestinians, and why there was really extensive engagement between the Black Panthers and Palestinian freedom organizations, a Palestinian liberation organization as well. So that was an era where the solidarity between Black people fighting for freedom here and Palestinians fighting for their liberation, that relationship of solidarity is cemented because it became clear that we are on the same side. And it became clear to many Black folks in this country that the folks here who are attacking us with water hoses, the people who run this government who are holding us down, they identified with Israel, right? So we knew who our friends were and we knew who our enemies were. I want to conclude this history by fast forwarding and saying, really, I think the next great chapter of Black Palestine solidarity is what we are living in today. We are in it right now. And so if you're new to it, welcome. Now is a wonderful time to join it. And this era, I think, really set off in 2014. Before 2014, people like Brother Cornel West, people like Sister Angela Davis, and other prominent Black intellectuals who identified with Palestine were calling attention to the oppression that Palestinians faced and trying to build solidarity. So they were doing that for many years. But the summer of 2014 was very special, because not only was it the summer when Israel was launching its latest war on the people of Gaza, it was also the summer where police in Ferguson, Missouri killed Michael Brown, and Ferguson rose up and we had the Ferguson uprising. And there was a point that summer where both those things were happening at the same time. You could turn on the news and watch Israeli jets bombing Gaza, and then the next minute see Black folks in Ferguson facing militarized police as we were fighting for our freedom here. And it is the case that there were Palestinians in Palestine who sent messages of solidarity saying, we are with you in Ferguson, who gave us instructions on Twitter about how to deal with tear gas because they know how to deal with tear gas in Palestine. There were Palestinians and Palestinian Americans in Ferguson on the ground from day one, marching with us as well. And since that uprising, there have been many more examples of Black folks going to Palestine on delegations, like what Sister Erica was talking about, and of Palestinians coming here as well to build solidarity. So I will conclude by saying that we have a rich history of this solidarity. And if you are new to it, welcome, come on in, and let's continue to build it as we all fight for our common liberation, because none of us are going to get free. We will not get free as Black folks here unless Palestinians get free, and vice versa. They will not get free unless we get free. We are in it together. So let's fight for our freedom together. Thank you.
All right, Corey, thank you so much. Again, just offering so much rich food. I hope y'all all at the table with us. This is a big table. It's a communion table. And Corey just gave us so much food to chew on, to digest. Some of it we're going to really take days and weeks and the rest of our lives to really work through. because it's so rich. Thank you so much. I mean, I was one of those activists in 2014. And then 1 year later, back in Ferguson in 2015, who got tear gassed. And it was through that experience that I actually learned about Palestine. I went to Palestine a year later with the Dream Defenders. Shout out to the Dream Defenders doing all their great work in Florida and throughout the country. And it was so crazy because Ferguson really made me cry over the sin of American racism. It just made it so blatant to me. But Palestine, it made me weep over the sin of American empire. And what do I mean by that? I just mean that what was happening in Ferguson wasn't just happening in Ferguson. It was happening in Palestine and, in fact, all throughout the world. And so that was so important. And I'm not an expert on this, Corey, like you are. So I just break it down real simple. And don't quote me on this because you could probably complicate this and flesh it out more. But the story you were talking about in terms of our relationship, Black Christians' relationship to the Exodus story, the way that I flip it is just that the new Israel has become the old Egypt. The new Israel has become the old Egypt. So we can't think, as you said, in that linear way and make that connection between the biblical Israel and the modern state of Israel. In fact, the historical tables have turned quite a bit. So thank you so much again, Erica, for bringing King up in here, Corey, for bringing this sort of long history of Black freedom struggle in which King is situated in. And of course, y'all, we are in an unprecedented moment. We are in an unprecedented moment. I don't have to remind anybody on this call that we are currently in the wake and in the heat of a global pandemic that has struck the earth and has disrupted and affected all of our lives. And yet, despite the fact that the pandemic is unprecedented in its nature, it's still all too familiar in its consequences. And Black communities and other vulnerable communities know that better than anybody. And so this question around Black and Palestinian solidarity is all happening within this, not just this sort of new normal, but what I would call the death of normal. No such thing as normal anymore. So we want to bring Ashley Henderson in, phenomenal activist and scholar, spiritual giant, working down at the Highlander Center, where Dr. King was, where Rosa Parks went through. I mean, all these activists went through in the 60s and beyond. So Ashley, come and help us make sense of this question of Black Palestinian solidarity, specifically in this moment of the pandemic. And just for those who may have lost someone or are grieving, just know that this number that I see at the bottom of my screen, what's that, 126? We know that you have names. We know that you have hearts. You've cried tears like many of us have. So just know that you're with us in spirit and that we're holding your grief as you hold ours. Ashley.
I shade at everything that my comrades before me have said. Yeah, just take a breath. It's a lot. Can I be honest, church? Can I be my full cussing Christian self? I just want to get permission because I want to be authentic with you. I see a couple of be honest. Facebook, can I be honest? Okay. I got
make it plain. Make it plain.
I got a few folks saying, yeah, my mama was AME, my daddy was Missionary Baptist, so I'm used to people responding when I say something. But I'm seeing I'm seeing enough yeses to know that I asked permission first. I'm pissed off, y'all. I'm angry. I am angry because for so many reasons. But one is that we absolutely know folks like Nora Ercott, folks, so many amazing, badass Palestinian activists have been saying for ages, and quite frankly, Black activists in this country that have been moved because of seeing the similarities between the injustice that Black Americans face and the struggles that our Palestinian comrades are facing. That Zionism isn't just a settler colonial movement that's predicated on the forced removal and annihilation of the native, but it's also a nationalist movement that's predicated on the racialized tropes deployed against, anyone that's not a white passing Jewish person. Like, let's just be honest, right? And if that is the case, then how can I ever just fight nationalism, white nationalism, as it shows up as a survivor of a Nazi attack. Many of y'all know that Highlander literally survived a Nazi attack last year, just over a year now. How can I fight those nationalist tendencies and then sit silently while very similar things are happening to my comrades in Palestine? That's one thing that makes me angry, right? That's one thing that makes me angry. The second thing that makes me angry is that like some of it is not rocket science, church. There are Black Palestinians. There are Black people in Palestine. It is a Black issue because Black people are there. They always have been. It is not new, right? So I am angry because there's ever an expectation that the Black movement of the 21st century, the Black liberation movement of the 21st century would only be interested in Black people domestically. I came back from my first trip to Palestine. I've been twice, more times than some of my comrades who are from there because they legally can't go home, right? But when I came back from my first trip, my comrades and I in the Movement for Black Lives dropped a document called the Vision for Black Lives. Anybody heard of the Vision for Black Lives? It was a policy platform. And people had said since 2012 that these young Black people were just angry. And I was pissed off. I've been perpetually pissed off since 2012. But I tell you what, the other thing that they said was that because we were just angry young people, that we didn't have a vision. So we wrote it. We wrote our vision. We made it plain. We put it into a policy platform. We said that Israel is an apartheid state with over 50 laws on the books that sanction discrimination against the Palestinian people. And that as a state that has maintained a military occupation of Palestine for decades, we needed to say something about it, right? Now, is there so many lessons learned from that process? Absolutely. But were we right about what we said? Absolutely. We absolutely were. We absolutely were. And so I'm mad that we make this issue so overcomplicated. We turn finger painting into rocket science, right? My comrade said it earlier. My liberation is tied up with Palestinians, period, and all other oppressed people. And then if we move in the world and in this country as a church, pretending that these caste systems, these racialized class systems don't exist, we are not moving in the way of Christ. It's just not possible, right? So I'm gonna say that, I'm gonna let it go. I'm also gonna, am I mad at Zionism? Absolutely. Am I mad at nationalism that oppresses our marginalized people? Absolutely. But you know who I'm the most angry at, church? I'm mad at our churches. I'm mad at our churches. I'm mad at anyone that would self-identify themselves as a faith leader who would argue anything other than movement work, liberation work to free all of our people, including Palestinian people, and fighting for their right to return as anything other than praise and worship. That every day I show up in a kafiyah, I am praising and worshiping my God. That every day I fight for the liberation of Palestinian people, I am a manifestation of the love that God has for its creation, right? So it is our duty, it is our absolute responsibility to fight in solidarity with the Palestinian people, because I believe that that is the absolute perfect will of my God, right? I believe in fighting for the Palestinian people because I don't believe that you can call yourself a progressive and not do it. Shout out to the Adala Justice Project for talking about and training so many people about what it means to not only be calling themselves progressive, but not talking about Palestine, but also pushing those of us on the Palestinian liberation movement side to be progressive about other things other than just Palestine. It has to be both, right? There is enough love. I believe in a perfect, all-knowing, all-loving God. And if I believe in that, how can I possibly not believe that there is enough of that love to go around for all of us so that all of us are participating in the liberation movements for each other? I know that that solidarity in practice is the will of God as well. I also strongly believe, I asked one of my closest Palestinian comrades what she thought I should say to you all. And what our conversation led to was a discussion about what it means that our faith, our Christian faith, and particularly in this racialized way that Black church just is, this beautiful cultural experience, spiritual experience that we have created over centuries of togetherness. what it means that that is being commodified and weaponized against somebody else, because that's absolutely what's happening. That's what's happening in a 21st century context, and it makes me mad that the faith of my grandmothers and great grandmothers is being literally profited off of by people who have never experienced the struggles that their faith got them through. And they're commodifying it, packaging it up, and selling it to other Black Christians that look and live and love like me for the sake of oppressing other people and keeping them from their homeland. That is not right, and we should be angry. What I know for sure is that I worship a Jesus Christ who turned over tables when people commodified his practice. I want to be that righteously rageful Jesus and say enough is enough. What I believe is in the radical king. I believe in the king that believed that white supremacy, capitalism, and militarism were evils of the devil, right? Like, not good. And if I believe in that Martin Luther King and that message that I do believe was ordained by God, then I know for certain that I have to stand up on the side of Palestinian people who are fighting against imperialism, colonization, militarism, capitalism, and all of the ways that they are oppressed in racialized ways, right? I have to believe in people like Vincent Harding, who believes, based on his faith practice, that another America and a new world still needed to be born, and we were to be the midwives. I have to believe that organizations like the Movement for Black Lives, organizations like FOSNA, organizations like Adult Justice Project, and so many more are doing the righteous Lord's work. And I believe that I know for sure that our excuses make no sense in a 21st century context anymore. They just don't, comrades. I think Corey already said it, or now one of the two of these brilliant ass men on this call said you can't be neutral. One of the founders of the Highlander Center, Miles Horton, said you can't be neutral on a moving train. And the train is moving, y'all. Whether it's the Trump administration, his relationship with Netanyahu, whatever, whether it's like the pretending to be neutral, which is actually just being complicit in the oppression of so many people in this country and abroad. We are not neutral, comrades. We are either on the side of bending the moral arc of the universe toward justice, or we're not. We are either fighting for the liberation of all people, or we're not. We are either walking in the righteous path that Christ has ordained us to walk in, or we aren't. And so today, comrades, we get to make a choice. We get to make a choice. Are we going to continue to pretend like we don't see after all of this incredible information that has been shared? Or are we going to actually start to figure out what is the most faithful next step that we can take towards practicing what we preach? Because I believe that if the city of Chattanooga, best city in the country, you can't argue me down, in the great state of East Tennessee, is sending, somewhere to the tune of like $1.5 million to Israel to weaponize, that $1.5 million that could have funded 18 elementary school teachers, or 980 people receiving food assistance, or 250 students receiving Pell Grants, or 622 children receiving healthcare during COVID, or 20 different clean energy jobs. That ain't what Jesus wants from me and my community in the most church city in the United States. That is not what my God wants from me. And I know that what my God wants is for us to treat these budgets like moral documents, to know that what we invest in is what we get. And if we invest in more bullets and guns and bombs, then we will get more hurt and harm people. And I believe we can do better than that. So comrades, I'm mad, I'm angry. And I spent time with these comrades talking to you in hopes that we could move you to do something. My goal isn't just to preach you up and make you feel. My goal is to make you move, right? So what I know for sure, my dad would say one thing's for certain, two things for sure. FOSNA and Niall are going to be giving you some concrete next steps that you can take to change the material conditions, not only of these people in Palestine, but of you. One of the best lessons I got out of Palestine, and then I'm gonna shut up, was asking Palestinian people, like, how are you not more hateful? Like, why aren't you as angry as I am? And the young people were like, we are. But the elders, I had to Mimi's father actually, was like, no, like, it's kind of like what we're doing is kind of like the Black liberation movement. And I was like, oh, you got to break that thing down for me. I don't understand. Because like, I understand that Black people are kind of mad at white people who are killing them with impunity. And he goes, oh, I'm not talking about being mad. I'm just talking about the opportunity. I was like, say more. And he said, Palestinian liberation, like the Black liberation movement, offers the oppressor an opportunity to decolonize their shit. So even though it's not the point of the Black liberation movement is to liberate Black people, but it does offer white people an opportunity to decolonize their own privileges, right? It saves white people from the white supremacy that they created too. And the same thing is true for Palestinian liberation. It offers our Jewish colleagues, comrades, sistren, an opportunity to decolonize their faith and not allow the commodification of their stuff too. And I think we have an opportunity as Christians, as folks of interfaith, and folks of no faith, quite frankly. If you've ever chanted, I believe that we will win, you are making a declaration of faith. This is an opportunity for us to stand together and be accountable to each other for the sake of the liberation of all people and saving this world. So if you're mad like me, I hope you do something. Pick one faithful next step. Have a conversation with your pastor. Talk to somebody at your church. Talk to your neighbors. Google search FOSNA. Send a donation. Do something. Lives literally depend on your action. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Ashley, so much. Can we clap it up? Stomp your feet. I can't do that dance, but I'm not great at dancing. Do your dance. Do what you do. That was, man, you stirred me up. You stirred me up. And I just want to quickly say, I loved how you didn't just speak to the need for us to be angry, but you are angry. You expressed your anger in speaking to the need for us to be angry. I just want to let you know that folks are feeling it. Somebody says, so glad you are angry. It's a phone number. I wish I could shout out your name. So glad you are angry. Other folks are talking about the rageful Jesus. You know, I think that anger is one of the fruits of the spirit of freedom struggle. And that's exactly what you told us. And underneath all of that anger is a deep, abiding love. That's what I heard. I heard a deep, abiding love that animated the anger. The same little Black church that I can't stand is the same little Black church that made me possible. And so, you know, we're here in a spirit of love, trying to push the church as children of God, as children of the church, to live up to its greatest call. So thank you so much, Ashley. We want to move forward. Please put your questions in the chat box. We are going to get the Q&A. We want to make sure we get an opportunity to have a conversation. But before then, we want to invite Sarah on to talk about Christian Zionism, this very particular aspect, but sits at the heart of this project that we're talking about. Can you break this down for us, Sarah?
Wow. Yeah. It is so good to be together. Because when I'm with other people, in my anger, in my grief, in my questions, and in this quest to be faithful, I know that that's the security, that's the belonging, and that's the blessing. So we've heard some history, hearing how we're connected, and Christian Zionism is what's in the way. It's a story that has taken hold of us, of many, and is trying to cut off that love that we want to put through. Personally, I lived in Jerusalem a few years back, and it was a deeply, deeply moving time. Having had a chance to work on liberation theology there at Sabeel, so Friends of Sabeel North America is looking towards Sabeel, Jerusalem, the place that has hosted Palestinian Christian liberation theology in this generation. It's been hosted for over 2 millennia by people seeking to be faithful to that indigenous wisdom tradition coming through. And I wanted to study it because growing up Mennonite, I knew about some liberation theologies and also African-American liberation theology, very motivated by Latin American liberation theology. So I wanted to learn, what is Palestinian liberation theology? And the big wake-up call for me was that the Exodus narrative, the freedom from Egypt, was not the backbone of Palestinian Christian liberation theology. Rather, 1 Kings 21, Naboth's vineyard, about a man falsely accused because he refused to sell his Nahalah, his inheritance land, and he declared his freedom. And so Ahab and Jezebel teamed up, got him killed, and Elijah went after them for that. And then the second piece is the cry of the refugee. Since 1948, Palestinians expelled all over the world, still ready, waiting to return. And the cry of the refugee that comes through the Psalms, the desire, hoping for justice, wanting to take it in one's own hands, but releasing it to God, but saying, I am here, use me. And the third pillar of that liberation theology, how Jesus stood in the inclusive line of the prophets, this deep line of Hebrew prophets who spoke words of expansion, inclusion, peace, power. So I went there to learn what is the liberation theology that helps people continue to struggle for justice. And also when I was at Spelman, I learned about African-American relationships with hardship, with structural oppression. And I wanted to know too, how are Palestinians dealing with so much pressure? And I learned from Afro-Palestinians there. I learned from the work of Christian peacemaker teams, which is doing on the ground daily accompaniment, walking children through checkpoints, building partnerships to transform violence and oppression for the Palestinian-led movement for nonviolent social change. And what I learned and what I saw so deeply resonated with my own story. Palestinians, like Black people, Ashley was just talking about it, working to maintain their humanity, our humanity and joy in very dire circumstances. And so I came home with a lot of joy. I came home with a lot of stories, a lot of grief. I came home also having met Jewish liberation theologians who are working to help Judaism not be smashed on one side by militarism and crammed in by nationalism on the other, but desiring to still live into the deep and ethical meaning and power that Judaism can bring to the world. And so we all began to work together towards liberation for the land of the Holy One. It took us all to learn, as Black Elk would say, that the Holy Land is everywhere. And what does it mean to land back here at home and be in diaspora? What does it mean for me to participate in an indigenous wisdom tradition from elsewhere? And how intense is it that every day I'm helping to pay for the oppression of other people? I can't let this go on. I would try to refuse to be implicated. But how did I get implicated? Christian Zionism started back in the 1800s. It predates actually secular Jewish Zionism. Decades before Theodore Herzl founded the Jewish Zionist movement, British, let's be clear, British Christian leaders were already fixated on the idea that Jews should move to Palestine. And they were building off a popular theology at that time that viewed Europeans as Christian soldiers, transferring God's battle plans from the Old Testament into the modern era, or the dispensation as in their terms. And they believed that Jewish rule in Palestine was part of God's strategy for a battle. But God doesn't need a strategy. God is God. Nonetheless, this Christian Zionist theology got deeply tied to empire. Ashley mentioned how it's the nationalist movement, and it originated at the height of British colonial expansion, which should kind of raise a red flag, because what was going on at that time was brutal everywhere. And these were the type of theologies and ideologies that helped to justify an ongoing use of the earth and the earth's people for colonial empire. All of this culminated in the Balfour Declaration, which gained Zionism international recognition, and is still being used today to justify the takeover of Palestine. I encourage Europeans to visit the Christian Holy Land, and many influential preachers went, and then they would come home and portray falsely the land as an empty place awaiting Jewish entry. And that should ring a bell for how people talk about other places in which people who were there were not recognized as full people. But when leading American evangelists saw how these ideas of the Holy Land, Corey talks about it, Palestine as a story, Palestine as a place when they saw how influential these messages were, began to be wrapped with other pieces of the Christian fundamentalist forming movement in the early 1900s. That movement gained steam in the 1950s, opposing integration, opposing interracial marriage, continuing on to oppose women's liberation, to oppose LGBTQ rights. So it's the forebears of those who are out protesting public health policies today. All of this wrapped in together. And for them, then political support for Israel solidified as a major tenet of Christian fundamentalism. And so the founding of the State of Israel in 48, the colonization of Jerusalem, the West Bank in 67, became fulfillments of prophecy, and it transferred on. And today, Christian Zionism is responsible for the promotion of some of the worst of Israel's policies: segregation of roads, of housing, of services, land theft. And we know how important it is to have land in order to flourish. The imprisonment of children, imprisoning a generation. It's a movie that chronicles this. Tying young children up to have police records that then will be held against them later. Segregation, land theft, imprisonment. These are all familiar things from Black experience across the diaspora. There's also ongoing destabilization of the Middle East through war, because as the more violence there is, the more justification for military buildup. And this begins to start encouraging things like deadly exchange. And Jewish Voice for Peace has worked really hard on letting people know that Israeli military intelligence and security is being exported here and around the world to talk about how to control and subdue populations. That's us, y'all. They're talking about controlling and subduing us. A phrase comes to my mind, though, as I was finishing up my time in Jerusalem, was the phrase, "Friends don't let friends drive drunk." Like, if your faith makes you a friend of Israel, for example, then when you see it doing terrible things, you speak up, just as you would for a friend. It's for the safety of everyone, your other friends, and the well-being of your friend itself. What I'm sharing now, perhaps if you're thinking, well, that's not my theology, there are many people who hold Christian Zionism. It's a widely held belief, but it's not held so deeply because it's come to many people as part of this kind of evangelical or Christian package. And so perhaps if this is not resonating with what you believe, think about how this might be helpful in you with that conversation with your pastor or with your neighbor, a frenemy, whoever, as you meet people where they are and seek to build this movement, joining with Faza and many others to counter Christian Zionism and to return to more faithful interpretations of what it means to be followers of a brown Palestinian Jew. Here in the age of Trump, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, that was for the base of Christian Zionists. That wasn't mostly here in the US, not for local folks. And we talk about the impacts of the American Israeli Political Action Committee, AIPAC, as being such an influential lobby. But Christians United for Israel is 10 times as big, 10 times as dangerous. And they're actively recruiting African American and Latinx and other people to vote against our own interests. Our interest is for civil, political, human, and national rights. And whenever there is an erosion in those rights anywhere, we are more in danger. Or as Dr. King would put it, an injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Furthermore, in the last couple of years, there's been a lot of anti-boycott, divestment, and sanctions legislation trying to move through at the level of states and at the national level. Boycotts have been a really important tool in the civil rights movement and for divestment for South Africa. Sanctions happen between nation to nation. But what BDS is helping to do is to show that economic violence is also a violence we must address. And so by withholding dollars and making choices that seek to bring health, wholeness, and nonviolence, we can participate in a broader movement Because just as we need allies in the civil rights movement and for our work today, Palestinians need allies as well. And the churches came together to say, hey, broader church all around the world, please work with us. And what has been stopping some of those anti-BDS legislation going through is NAACP's work back in the day to make sure to protect the right to boycott, like in the segregated South. That was NAACP versus the Claiborne Hardware Company legislation, if you want to look at that court case. But the assault on our rights everywhere continues in the name of Christian Zionism, in the name of a particular end times theology. So now we know a little bit more about what we're dealing with, the power of Christian Zionism as a theology and ideology to influence policy. We can take action because it's not just enough to think it's wrong. On the daily, Palestinians are mobilizing to resist this oppression through nonviolent direct action, and we need to be there with them. So FASNA has a dream and also has a plan, June 28, a summit to counter CUFI, to raise up an alternate theology, to let people know you can be faithful without Christian Zionism. You can come home to a theology that values the place and the people of the Near East, as well the place and the people of where you live, building Indigenous solidarity the world around. That summit will be, it's a Sunday, so it'll be like church all day, working together with people from all different walks of life to come together and to praise and to develop this. So check that out. And you can also sign the Black Church Call to End Israeli Apartheid. Now I'll help put that together, and also he'll be hosting a follow-up call to this. So don't let this be your last moment. Join this movement. Some folks get worried, like Genesis 12:3, it said, I will bless those who bless you. Whoever curses you, I will curse. And all the peoples of the world will be blessed through you. That particular conversation that was passed down for generations between God and Abraham. But in their interpretation, the modern state of Israel is just the you that's referred to in that verse. And then that tying up with the prosperity gospel becomes a belief that God will cause people to have financial, material success if you bless the state of Israel. I'm here today to say you won't miss your blessing if you support freedom, equality, and justice for all. And that our prosperity is found in each other and in our relationships, not what money or political power can buy for an expedient understanding at the end of the earth. This is a place that God chose to manifest. And as we celebrate Ascension Day today, we want to lift the vibration and lift the story of God incarnate in Jesus that moved beyond any one nationality, that spoke words of peace and said, I will break down the dividing wall between you. The blessing is for all, where you are and who you are. And that blessing is waiting on the front line. So get to the front line. Go get your blessing. There may not be one altar call today, but the altar is on the front line where people are laying down their lives to show up for one another because the time is now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Y'all clapping y'all hands. Y'all doing the snaps. Thank you. So, I mean, I don't know about y'all on the call, but when I first got into this, it felt like such a big thing. Now I would get responses like, it's complicated. And that would always sort of like, it would cause some friction because I was like, well, I was there. I saw the checkpoints. I met the kids who had been to jail and prison 2-3 times. And then I was on a tour with a Palestinian who was taking us around like a hood, like a Palestinian hood called Hebron. And we were walking past another delegation and I overheard the delegation and I was like, oh, they talking about Jesus. And I went to Palestine because I was young and Black and got tear gassed in Ferguson. I hadn't even thought about the fact that my faith put blood on my hands. So we have dreams in our hearts. We have plans. We have a history on our back. We have a pandemic all around us, but we got blood on our hands. And we can't be like Pontius Pilate and try to wash our hands shallowly as the empire lynches and executes and turns into martyrs these children in Palestine, these Black kids in New York City and Los Angeles, and 25-year-old in Georgia trying to jog, blood on our hands. Somebody gave a comment, I can't go back and see it, but said something about what's up with all the silence in the church. Now, I want to shout out the churches, the few and far between, but there are some churches that are speaking loud and clear, but too many are not. So thank you so much, Sarah, for bringing that in and challenging us as Christians, challenging us. And so just to reiterate, as we said, y'all know already, faith without works is, I heard somebody say dead. I heard somebody say dead. If you didn't, you got to go back and read it. You got to go back and read it. Faith without works is dead, y'all. And so it also says to be hearers, not just hearers, but what else? Doers of the word. And so we have said a lot here. We've been sitting at this communion table. And now the question is, what are we going to do when we get up? What are we going to do when we get up from this table? We're going to go back home and say, oh, that tastes good. That food was real nice. Fed my soul. You know, I feel good now. Are we going to use that food as fuel to go do freedom work in the world? So we don't have all the answers, and the action items that I'm going to put on the table are just some, but they are small steps that can begin to make a difference in our churches, in our communities, and in ourselves. So one thing that we can do, brother Torian and I think Torian's still on the call. Shout out to my boy, Matt Harris. I hope he's still on here, went to seminary with him. I just want to shout out people giving a lot of love. We wrote a little statement calling for Black churches to join the Palestinian liberation movement. Rochelle is going to post that right now into the chat. Please read it. Don't just sign it, but read it. See if it gels with what you heard here. Wrestle with it. Share it with others. Make it a part of your political education circle, your Bible study. Perhaps let it inform your sermon making, whatever it is. But read it, and if you believe in it, please sign it. Please sign it, and please share it with another pastor or with another Christian friend of yours or with any ally. Also, there is a action. So we talked about Christian Zionism, right? There's an organization called CUFI, Christians United for Israel, which claims to be the largest pro-Israel lobbying group in the country. They have a lot of power, they have a lot of money, and they love to recruit Black people. Sarah, you went to Spelman. I was like, you know, because I went to Morehouse, and they be all up on Morehouse and Spelman's campuses. They all up, you know, recruiting us to go to DC to their meetings, recruiting us to go to Israel. And they do that because they know that Black people have a more powerful moral voice. And if they can get Black folks on their side, that they think that can justify the oppression that they're maintaining. But we're not going to let them do that. So we also asked, there's an action coming up on June 28th. It was going to happen in person, but now because of the pandemic, it's happening online. And we are going to be protesting CUFI's upcoming action. Rochelle is going to place the link. We ask that you would join in that. The details are all there. And lastly, I'm going to have a follow-up call. Hopefully some of the panelists can join me. I know they're super busy, but we're going to have a follow-up call on June 16th. If you registered for this, you will get an email. If you didn't register for this or hopped on somehow, put your email address in the chat box right now, and we'll follow up with you on that call. We got to move democratically. So this wasn't about us telling you what to do. This was about us saying, let's sit at the table and figure out what we need to do and join up with people who are already doing things. So it's 7:10. We're a little bit behind schedule, but we have about 15 or so minutes to open up for Q&A. Y'all still with me? Y'all here? All right. I think I hear somebody eating in the background. That's okay. You can eat. We know you're home. Some people watching your children. Shout out to the people watching their children who, you know, they're doing essential work of watching them kids who ain't always good. You know, while you're on all these Zoom calls, shout out to you. Much love to you. But we want to open up for Q&A. So how how shall we do this? Rochelle actually might need your help here. Should I just read the questions out? Maybe you could say it in the chat box. And then we can begin the Q&A. If you have a question that's for a particular panelist, we ask that you would put their name. If it's general, then we just ask that you would post the question generally. But Rochelle, if you can comment in the chat to help me. Okay, let's start that way. So panelists, do you have questions for each other? Feel free, y'all take it over.
Yeah, I mean, I saw one in the chat that was like, how do we explain how Zionism, what the relationship between Zionism and colonialism? So maybe we can start there and give folks a second to warm up. Anybody want to jump in? I can rant all day, but you know.
I got some thoughts. But I'll say something that feels that is the first thing that comes to mind because it's the most straightforward, and I hope therefore it's useful for folks on the call to think about and useful to talk to other folks about, which is truthfully what Israel is doing now and what the current US government is doing now. They're making it very clear for us. I mean, Trump, his signature campaign platform plank was, we're going to build a wall. He was explicit that he was inspired by Israel's walls. Israel, by the way, they built a wall that goes through the West Bank and into Jerusalem, but they're actually walling off the entire country. They're building a wall on every single border they have. So that's their vision that they want, and Trump agrees with it. And Trump tweets about it, and Netanyahu retweets. I mean, they're very clear that they're together. So if you're looking at what Donald Trump is doing, caging children, building walls, openly, attacking indigenous people, all this violence. If you're looking at that and you're horrified, and the people in your community are horrified, but they look at Israel and they see something different, ask them what does Donald Trump think of Israel, because he loves it. You know what I mean? And so it's very clear that they are both embracing a racist, supremacist colonial project, and that's why they work so closely together. It's not accidental that the US police collaborate with the Israeli police. It's not accidental. It's because they see what they have in common. And all I'm saying, and I think all we're saying, is let's see what we have in common with Palestinian folks, right? There you go.
That's wonderful.
I think
go ahead, Ashley, go ahead.
I think it's interesting, right? I was an English major, so I really think words matter. I think they actually have meaning, right? So if somebody was debating me about whether or not Zionism and colonialism were synonyms, they mean the same thing, the first thing I would do is look up the definition of colonialism, right? So I did. And what I found was that it is the policy and or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers and exploiting it economically. That is literally that's literally what is happening, right? And I think the argument typically that I've heard from Jewish comrades that I disagree with on the practice of Zionism have said, well, but like, we didn't do it. We're not there because of economic gain. We are there because we're refugees. It's like, yeah, totally. But are you supporting policies and the practice of fully or partially taking political control over a place that was not yours, that like other people there were natives already there, right? Are you doing that? Yes. Okay. Are you occupying it with settlers? They literally call them settlements, right? And are you exploiting it economically, right? Anybody that's been to Palestine has seen those black little water buckets on top of some people's houses and not on others. We literally are seeing it, right? We're seeing the greenwashing of Palestine, planting pine trees where olives grow, right? It's literally the definition. So if folks start pushing back because of that, again, I would literally take them straight to the definition of like what colonialism is, and just make it plain, show them what it is. You know, I think people are like, well, how do we convince Black churches that this is something that's important, right? And again, I think we can intellectualize this all day long. The thing that gave me words to my rage was being there myself. And so you've heard me push back around the commodification of our faith and like these Black Christian Zionist tours, right? However, there's so many amazing organizations that take people of goodwill to hear from Palestinians and Israelis about what is actually happening with this occupation. They don't always agree, right? But you get to go and you get to see it for yourself outside of the sort of like religious washing of what happens when Black Christian Zionists are like just duped to go and visit the motherland, right? To visit the Holy Land. So I would strongly recommend checking out some of the really incredible organizations. That's how I came to know who Fosna was, how I came to know who Adullah was actually going and meeting with some of these folks and their bases over there outside of the context of just my faith. So yeah, I recommend actually like sending your folks over there. The one thing that Palestinians told us to do was to not be so scared that we didn't come back and tell other Americans to come and see it for themselves as well. So I think it's on us to make sure that that's happening.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you both. I want to get folks' questions in, and I'm going to try to condense some of them. Being that you just spoke about the tours, I'm going to put 3 questions into one because one includes more specifically the tour. So Derica asks, being able to go to Israel is a great source of pride for many Black clergy, as you talked about, Ashley. How can we let them know which tours to go on and which ones to avoid? So just more specifically, but I want to stick in 2 more questions to that so we can get other folks. And while you name those other folks, if Rochelle, you can drop some of the links perhaps or the names into the chat box so people can follow up, that'd be great. Bennett asks, what do you all think is the best way to encourage Black churches to get off the bench on this issue? And then third, I saw a question from Casey who says, any advice, guidance for a recent Duke Divinity graduate struggling to find meaningful work community in these times? What can millennials be doing when struggling to connect to the more silent side of the church? So what kind of delegations and tours should folks be going on? And how can folks encourage Black Christians and pastors? And how can we situate ourselves differently in the church? Anybody could take it.
Well, I'll just start, and I want to give major shout out to the Adallah Justice Project. That's how I went in 2018. I didn't know nobody in Palestine, but I know that the Spirit told me to go. We had just finished the 40 days of action here for the Poor People's Campaign, and I felt clearly that I was called to go to Palestine to see for myself. And I reached out to Sister Sandra Tamari. I don't know if she's on this call tonight, but I reached out to her on WhatsApp, literally, still got the conversation to this day, and said, I need to go. And she literally connected me to so many groups there on the ground organizing and doing the work. And so I went by myself, you know what I mean? Like I didn't have no group to go with me. My family folks was like, you going by yourself? They like, you know, folks were like, are you sure? And I'm like, I'm sure. I'm sure. And I went and I was there for a week and I got a chance to see for myself. And Sister Ashley, what you said was so true about those water tanks on folks' houses and hearing how when people speak out, the soldiers would shoot those water tanks so that people wouldn't have water. And that made me think about my hometown, Saginaw, Michigan, which is right next door to Flint, how they poison people there, how 6 years later, we still ain't got clean water. And so what I would just say to you is you can reach out to Adallah Justice Project. There's other groups. I just know that's the way I went. And I got money from folks to help me, or as the old folks used to say, to hope me. And I got to Palestine. And I'm so grateful that I did. And so what I would just challenge us for, the second question is to get other clergy involved. Think about this. If you are clergy in this day, are you a chaplain of the empire or are you a prophet of God? Which one are you? Which one are you? Are you a chaplain of the empire or are you a prophet of God? And I'm here to tell you today, this pandemic, if you ain't feeling it and seeing it, that we are being called to go deeper. That bubblegum theology shit we doing and not being serious about the cause of Christ, those days are over. We ain't going back to normal. There was never a normal. The normal was people dying, 250,000 people dying every year because of poverty. That was the norm. And you got now almost 94,000 people dying because of a pandemic, because this fucking country ain't did what they said they would do, which was promote the general welfare of all people. And the church has been too quiet, as Ashley said. Too many of us are doing too much and not doing the cause of Christ. And so I would challenge you today, you cannot follow Christ if you're not down for the cause of Christ. And I'm just gonna be bold enough to say it tonight, you ain't about that. And you ain't a real Christian if you really out here not saying what Christ would be saying, and as Ashley said, turning over tables and calling for a revolution. We passed reform, y'all. The days for reform are over. We need revolution, and the church has got to be on the forefront. That's why too many of our politicians are running amok, because the church ain't saying shit.
That's a
That's
drop the mic moment. That's when and then you just drop it and you walk off the pulpit right there. That's bubblegum theology. I gotta steal some of that. I'm gonna shout you out for sure. That was just fire.
I'm still in bubblegum theology, most definitely. Also, shout out to Eyewitness Palestine. I went with them. I went with the Center for Constitutional Rights. And I saw that Rochelle's amazing and dropping a link to FOSNA that has like a whole like web page on their website about places that you could check out that'll take you on ethical tours.
We have a question for Sarah from Anne. Says, I take church groups to Palestine and Israel every year and wonder if there is a resource for them to study Palestinian liberation theology and Bible study. So often when overwhelmed by the Palestinian story, pilgrims complain, quote, we just want to see where Jesus walked. Why do we need to hear all this? End quote. I need more answers.
Thank you, Anne, for doing that work. Thank you for bringing people to that place. One thing I trust is that kind of no matter how people are in the moment, maybe even dealing with the shock of the heat and everything else, that transformation is happening. The place and the people. Leave us all changed, as many of us have testified to. So thank you for just making it logistically possible to get people there. But Christ is at the checkpoint. Christ is in the line, waiting. Christ is in the ambulance. They can't make it all the way to the hospital. Christ is in Bethlehem again. and people are dealing with immense grief when they realize how betrayed they've been by the story that they've been told, and their ease and comfort is incredibly disturbed. But we are to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. So it sounds like you're doing the Lord's work. I saw some of the Justice Only Justice, the Palestinian Christian liberation theology is available on Blood Brothers can be a start for folks, but don't let that be your last book. Living in the Shadow of the Cross by Paul Kivel, challenging the power and privilege of Christian hegemony, helps us look at it worldwide. And letting people know that you are, when you're with suffering, Jesus had a powerful way of being able to accompany and be together with suffering. And so as your pilgrims feel their own suffering and wrestle with it, that's a Gethsemane moment. And it took Jesus all night to say, not my will, but yours be done. And if it took Jesus all night, it may take others a few weeks or months or years. But we're on this transformation journey. Another person asked a little bit about anti-Black racism in the Arab community. Why should we be in solidarity with them then? Yes, it exists, and it's very hard. And yet there are many, through relationship and through us showing up, despite having to deal with ongoing racism, healing is happening, transformation can happen. When we show up, we don't just show up alone, we show up together with people that can help and have different gifts in building connections with one another. Movement work is not easy, but the promise that we have is that we're not alone. So I think in building relationships together between Palestinians and Black people, the moments of healing from not only our shared struggle, but our times of hysterical laughter after doing actions together, or really just having God's back, having our back, I said having God's back. Yeah, we need to have God's back right now. God is suffering because of what's happening in the church. That's what Erica said. But that's what I would say to kind of that bundle of questions. And I really appreciate people's reframe of friends don't let friends drive drunk. Yes, friends don't let friends colonize Palestine. Friends don't let friends oppress other people. So let's keep at it with our faith that God loves everyone equally. I remember that song. All God's children got shoes. I got shoes. You got shoes. We're gonna walk all over God's heaven. That's this whole planet, and let's keep moving together towards freedom.
Thank you so much, Sarah. We want to field one more question, if that's okay. We want to try to stay as close to the time as possible so we can keep the answer relatively brief. And then Ashley, I believe, is going to finish us out in song. So we have a question. I'm not sure how to pronounce your name, so I won't try. But the question is, for a Black Palestinian woman, recent graduate of Harvard Divinity, got a lot of divinity school and seminary, and shout out, I know it's not easy. That seminary can make you crazy. So if you still out here, good job. For a Black Palestinian woman, recent graduate of Harvard Divinity, what role do you believe artists and cultural activities play in relation to the church? And how might liberation theology support and inform these cultural movements? Anybody on the panel want to take that before we end off?
I mean, Highlander Center believes deeply in the power of cultural organizing. So thank you so much for this question. And when we talk about cultural organizing, we think of it as a triad, like a triangle, right? And one plank of it is art and culture, because they're not the same thing, right? Art and culture. The foundation is faith and spirit. It got whitewashed to holistic wellness. We're reclaiming faith and spirit. And the third plank is policy and practice. And when you put it all together, I truly believe that art and culture plus faith and spirit will change policy and practice. And I think that that's important, not only because of the identities that you carry. I think it's important because it will change external facing policies and practices that are impactful to Black Palestinians, but it'll also be transformative to the churches and the faith communities that you are going to lead, right? I don't believe that you get the kind of political change or revolutionary change that some of us have said that we want without cultural intervention. I'll tell you why. In part, I believe it's because I think for many of us, our revolutionary, visionary imaginations are atrophied. I think they're atrophied. I don't think we can dream big enough. I don't think we can believe in a God that is good enough and big enough to give us all that we need to make the change that we desire and deserve actually possible. I believe that's why we don't take the risks that we ought to be taking. And if there was any kind of group of people that could help us see worlds that don't exist yet, quite frankly, I think they're artists and culture bearers, right? They're the people that can it's the Octavia Butlers, it's the Baldwins, right? It's the Bessie Smiths, it's the Nikki Giovannis, right? They're people that literally can weave new worlds with their creation that give us enough faith, right, to lean into risk that we wouldn't have otherwise taken. So I think it is absolutely critical for someone like you with the intersecting identities and interests and skill sets and gifts to be able to actually influence what becomes possible. I think people like you make the impossible possible every day. I'm excited for what will become because you are.
That's absolutely beautiful. Also, shout out to, I've said his name a few times, but he's just this dope person and doing cultural work at the intersection of faith and justice, specifically around Palestine. Torian Webb, also doing an amazing project right now. So the person who asked that question, Torian, please, if you're still on the line, connect with that person over your project and y'all can build and maybe make something out of that. So one of the best things I saw in Palestine, now I don't like when people come back and they only talk about all the oppression. I mean, what I saw was the beauty in the midst of the oppression. That's the story we need to tell. That's what this call was about. This call was about a refusal to let death have the last word. 300-something thousand people dying all across the world. Unnecessary suffering in Palestine, in the United States, in Brazil, in India. I mean, we can go on and on and on. And this call is about refusing to let death have the last word. Ashley, can you take us out? We want to thank everybody. Can we thank the panelists first? Clap, snap, put it in the chat box. If you appreciated them, please say it. They worked so hard. They took time out of their schedules to prepare for this. Some people just show up on panels, and ain't nothing wrong with that. I'm just saying, they prepared, and that's a beautiful thing. So please give them a lot of love. And Ashley, please take us out.
Yeah, can we, while Niall's being deflective, can we give it up to Niall Fort one time for his vision, for his level of accountability, not only to Palestinians, but to Black people, to the liberation movement that is his inheritance, to his calling to lead us out of our own ridiculousness. And can we give it up one time to Fasna for making all of this space possible? Y'all are incredible. Thank you so much for your work and the opportunity. Shukran, shukran, shukran. All right. So yeah, when we were in the prep call talking about how to close this out, I had recently been, anybody that knows Highlander knows that we believe we open in culture, we close in culture, or we ain't done it right? And so I had been in a space with the incredible Wendy O'Neill, who is just literally like one of the best humans on the planet, and also one of the most talented culture bears that I've had the honor of learning from and with, sang a song that I'd never heard before. And she taught me that it was by a woman named Michaela Harrison. Michaela used to work with a shelter program, and she wrote it with the people that were living in that shelter, mostly who were fleeing domestic violence situations. She said that they were trying to talk about the things that they deserved and desired and that they needed. And so some of the things that came up were like protection when they went home. And so they started making up this chant that became their starting song every time that they came together. She says that sometimes when they sing it, they specifically talk about in this moment that they are manifesting protection. So I'm gonna teach you the words. This is kind of like the opportunity that all of us that don't really sing that great have been dreaming of, because you can sing as loud as you want. We can't even hear you, yo. And guess what? Like, we can't see you either. So you can be as animated. You can put your hands in the air, right? You can really feel this. I believe that if you don't do it like you mean it, it won't be real. The other thing that Wendy taught me, and then I'm going to teach you the lyrics, is that sound waves don't stop, right? They move differently than just the things that we can see, right? And so if we sing it with intentionality, like we really mean it and believe it for each other and for ourselves, that even if we're physically distant, there might be a day where the sound waves that I sang bump up into the sound waves that you sang, and another impossible thing becomes possible, right? What a beautiful, beautiful world it would be, right? So I really want you to like meditate on these words. And if you don't feel it and you don't believe it, chill, it's cool. Just enjoy us singing it. But if you have some energy to give to it, I think we need it more now than ever. So the words of the song are simply this. I'm going to say it, and then I want you to repeat it after me. The words are, I am manifesting protection. There's a force field all around, keeping me safe and whole. I am manifesting protection. There's a love inside that fortifies my soul. That's the whole song, y'all. We might change the I to we. We might change the me to us, right? You feel me? But that's the song. So now I'm going to sing a line and you're going to repeat it. And then after we do that, we're going to try to sing it together. Cool? So the first line is, I am manifesting protection. Your turn. Y'all so beautiful. There's a force field all around, keeping me safe and whole. I am manifesting protection. There's a love inside that fortifies my soul. Man, now you looking real Luther Vandross-ish. I can't even tell, brother. I can't even tell. All right. Now we're going to try to sing it together. So again, it don't matter. Just sing it like you mean it, right? It won't matter how it sounds. If we all do it together, we'll sound beautiful, right? We can't breathe and sing together. We can't get free together. Here we go. You ready? Y'all ready? Oh, you got to make me believe it. Are you ready? Here we go. I am manifesting protection. There's a force field all around, keeping me safe and whole. I am manifesting protection. There's a love inside that fortifies my soul. We are manifesting protection. There's a force field all around, keeping us safe and whole. We are manifesting protection. There's a love inside that fortifies our souls. You are manifesting protection. There's a force field all around, keeping you safe and whole. You are manifesting protection. There's a love inside that fortifies your soul. I am manifesting protection. There's a force field all around, keeping me safe and whole. I am manifesting protection. There's a love inside that fortifies my soul. I love y'all. Peace and blessings.
Love you all. Y'all take care. Thank you so much. This was amazing. It really, really fortified my soul. Y'all take care.
Thank you.
June 16th, follow-up call. Don't forget. We'll be following up. Peace, y'all. Y'all be good.